Our topic here is active learning. Notice that in order to talk about active learning, we have to start by being active. This presentation on active learning was presented at the Symposium on Teaching Public Health at Boston University School of Public Health on March 28, 2018. So what do we mean by active learning? Very simply, it's a teaching approach that strives to more directly get students to participate in the learning process rather than passively listening. The learning process is typically enhanced if students read, write, discuss, or are engaged in solving problems as well as enjoy or at least appreciate their learning experience. How it is taught is as important as what is taught. Here's a picture that distinguishes active learning from passive learning. Which is which? I'll let you figure that out. I'm basically going to talk about four general approaches to active learning, and this is from a perspective of my background, which has involved teaching biostatistics and epidemiologic methods over a long career of 48 or so years. The first general approach, and this is very important, and one of your other speakers will also be talking about this, as this is on their agenda also, is to create a relaxed, friendly classroom environment that positively influences student motivation for taking and remaining in the course. This is very important because if you are interested in active learning, you want your students to be feeling that they want to be there. And particularly, this is true for statistics courses that I've experienced from way back then when the students hated the subject matter. But this is not a problem limited only to statistics courses. You, as instructor, want to do things that make the students want to be in the class. Among the things you can do is make a positive first impression by trying to learn the students' names, no matter how large the class. I don't know how many of you do this, although I know of a few people who do. I've been doing this for years, and it's not that easy to do, especially if you have a class of 150 or so students. But it is very important in that it helps to stimulate the class from the get-go, since your students realize that they think that you know something about them and that you are interested in them as individuals. Next, be friendly, humorous, and receptive to questions in and out of the classroom. Among these things here, all of which are important, humor is not an easy thing to do. It helps to have the right kind of personality, for example, my Brooklyn background. It's important to bring humor in such a way that you are not just telling jokes, but rather putting in something about yourself, how it relates to the class or what you are teaching, or even making a face at the class or even yelling at the class. Next, learn to improvise during your lecture. One of my sidelines is that I'm a jazz flutist, so I have learned how important it is to improvise in one's playing. That's very important in teaching also, because when it looks like things are slowing down as you are teaching your class, or things aren't going right in what you were trying to explain, you have to learn how to change how you do things in the class. Not only what you say, but how to motivate the class to be interested in what you are teaching. Next, be conscious of using clear and simple communication. You want to make sure that when you are teaching students, you are approaching how to communicate to your students, not communicating to other faculty. You want the students to understand what you are saying, so it's important to make things simple enough to be understandable by your students. The second category is to create alternative approaches to teaching a class rather than using a standard lecture format. This essentially involves teamwork. One way to do this is having small discussions, small group discussions in the classroom. Here's a picture to illustrate that. Another way is to have student take-home final exam projects with abbreviated summary presentations by project groups to the entire class. You should probably also have in-class class exams taken by individuals in addition to a take-home exam project. Thirdly, peer instruction or a peer-and-peer approach is often another alternative. And here's a picture of a bunch of students teaching other students, which is what you mean by a peer-to-peer approach. And lastly, as another approach to alternatives, is the flip approach to classroom teaching. Now, I actually haven't done this myself, but other people have and really like this as an alternative way of teaching. Traditionally, not using the flip approach, your homework is given before the class, homework exercises on previously covered material, and then during the class, new material is introduced. In the flipped approach, the homework that's given before the class is to read or study new material, whereas during the class, exercises on the new material are given. Thirdly, as a third category of active learning, is to provide mechanisms for reinforcing learning outside the regular classroom. One of these is to have higher level students as teaching assistants. Very important to have lab sessions and office hours, in addition to just you as the instructor to have teaching assistants involved. Secondly, to have learning management systems as part of your course, or LMS. Two examples of learning management systems are Blackboard and Canvas. I've been using Blackboard, but Canvas is another one, and I'm sure there are others. Thirdly is to have lecture recording videos, as is illustrated by this picture of me teaching a class on matching. At Emory, ever since we've had our new building for the past 10 years, we built into the classrooms ways to record all our classes, and I've been doing that, and I provide these recordings immediately to the class after the class is over. And lastly on this list is distance learning, which actually doesn't really involve a class that you're meeting with. It really involves teaching people from different parts of the country or different parts of the world using internet communication. And it's being done more often, and I've done this in several different courses for different groups of learning. And the fourth approach that's on the list here is to incorporate multimedia instructional materials to promote active learning. Early on, when we didn't have a lot of technical ability to teach in the classroom, the usual way of teaching was to use chalk on Blackboard, as one of the pictures, the picture on the left illustrates, and that's actually me teaching in 1971. Later, overhead projectors were introduced, and I actually got to the point where I actually used two overhead projectors to teach in my class. For example, on one projector, I would show a formula, and on the other projector, I would show an example of the formula. Now, these approaches, chalk on blackboard and using overhead projectors, are older, but some of them are still in use, and it's not that bad if as long as you do it well. Next, I started doing multimedia learning by developing a multimedia approach for teaching probability using transparencies. This is a picture of the first of the transparencies on teaching probability, where you see a very colorful picture, and I had a sample of people in a small picture here, and using the data on these people, that some of whom smoked and some of whom who had some kind of respiratory problem. I was able to set this thing up as a two-way table and then illustrate teaching probability using the qualities, the features of two-way tables. Another multimedia approach that I then also used was to develop slide tape presentations on fundamentals of statistical inference. Here's an example of one of them, one of the approaches I use. I actually developed 8 different presentations, which I made copies of and put in the library for students to actually go to the library and look at these presentations and learn them in the library rather than in class. I also made brief presentations in class on what was in the library. Both of these new approaches that I developed in the early 70s are now available in PowerPoint that I was able to do in 2012. Another approach that relates to multimedia instruction was something that I developed way before PowerPoint was even part of something that people used as they use regularly nowadays. I developed and wrote 2 texts that are now in the 3rd edition. One, logistic regression of self-learning text, and the other, survival analysis of self-learning text. My co-author is Mitch Klein, in which these texts were written in PowerPoint form, even though I didn't know what PowerPoint was. And the characteristic of these texts was that on each page, the page was split up so that there were 2 columns. And on the left side of the page were what would have been the slides in a PowerPoint presentation. On the right side of the same page would be the text that the narrator or the instructor would give when they're actually giving the PowerPoint presentation. But these texts were developed way before PowerPoint was ever invented, and it was an interesting idea that to do it this way, since nobody had ever done anything like this before, and they're very popular texts. They've been used for many, many years by not only in my classes, but in texts in classes throughout many schools of public health throughout the U.S. and other parts of the world. And lastly, of the different multimedia instruction materials to develop was my most proudest presentation called Active Epi, which is the first multimedia epidemiologic textbook, which I developed and completed in 2015. And you notice I got a picture of a present here because this was a present that I gave to the world, in the sense that it's free to anyone, anywhere in the world. There are 15 chapters. At the time of this talk, there are over 9,900 users to date in over 100 countries. So here is a summary of the 4 active learning approaches I've just described within the last several minutes of this presentation. The first approach is to create a relaxed, friendly classroom environment that makes people want to be in the course. Second approach is to create alternative approaches for teaching a class rather than using a standard lecture format. Thirdly, to provide mechanisms for reinforcing learning outside the regular classroom. And fourthly, to incorporate multimedia instructional materials to promote active learning. So this summarizes what I mainly want to say about different ways that one could make learning active. And that's all I want to say about the main topic, except that I want to add something that I would like to see if I can get people interested in being involved in. And what that is a proposal. It's a proposal to organize an effort to incorporate public health epidemiology, particularly epidemiology, into the required STEM high school curriculum, which could involve contributors to this symposium who are interested in this idea, or other U.S. public health faculty who think this is an important contribution to public health education. Active Epi Web is perfect for high schools. It's free, it's fun, health is a part of everyday life, and it combines science and math stat understanding or explanations that are fairly carefully developed to make it fairly easy to understand. A possible approach that I would think about starting this project would be to develop through a grant, perhaps, a US-wide short course program for high school science teachers. These courses, or these short courses, would be taught during the winter breaks and the summer breaks that high school teachers have. And the teachers, the instructors, would be faculty from schools of public health throughout the US. So this is a proposal that I'd like to get some feedback from any of you who are listening to this presentation to send me an email or a phone call to express your interest. Thank you. I want to briefly add something to the presentation to say something a little bit more about Active Epi Web. If you want to access Active Epi Web, I put on this screen the link, the free link to this website that you just click on this link or put it in your browser. Click on your browser and you sign up, and you can use Active Epi Web as often as you want to learn about the epidemiologic methods and related ideas in terms of where biostatistics fits in there. Also, there's an author's link that the link I've written here, http www.activeepi.com. You could click on this link if you want to get details about the features of the Active Epi website, and you actually also want to get some other features that I've developed in terms of multimedia aspects of teaching epidemiology. So these are the two things that I'm adding here. Now, I want to say one last thing about Active Epi is that, again, Active Epi is a website, it's electronic, it involves 15 lessons or chapters. It's a 21st century update of the textbook that I wrote with Larry Cooper and Hal Morgenstern in 1982, called, sometimes abbreviated as KK&M. It has short narrated expositions, animated, video, interactive. There are short quizzes. There are on and off clickable asterisks or footnotes. There are homework exercises, and there's a glossary and index. And it's a lot of fun to use, and you'll learn a lot, and I hope you'll consider signing up and learning about epidemiology using Active Epi Web. Thank you.